All right, and then here, you put in start streaming. Are you sure you want to start streaming? And we should see a green line up here. What is there? Okay, now we're online. We're online. Oh, wait. Oh, we don't want that. That's
Several second delay.
Oh, we don't want that.
Several second delay.
Now, I don't know. I can't tell whether the outside world is getting us or not. All right.
Well, will Dale call?
What?
Dale will call, right?
Okay.
He'll say no.
All of these things. All right. I think we're ready to go. It's setting number 1 now.
Got your pocket thing started?
Oh, all kinds of problems here. I'm going to have to break for a second. We'll have silence. Too many technicalities. Absurd to be talking about the depths of the universe and getting caught up in wires. All right. No phone calls, so we must be all right. All right, for those of you who weren't able to attend the first meeting of this school year, we have started a new sub-series. We are looking into cause and consequence. We looked at that in the very beginning of this course several years ago, but now we're looking at it anew. And we're doing it now since this is the main subsection on cosmology. We are doing cause and consequence relative to cosmology, which is how things get done in the cosmos. And it is at the heart of the cycle of rebirth. Cause and consequence and rebirth are two of the most important factors in human evolution right now. And we're doing this by asking questions. Questions that are so fundamental that they sound silly or absurd. In fact, they might be silly or absurd. We began last time by asking, how do we know that cause and consequence are connected? And this led us to the heart of creativity and how we bring new things into being and put them into destiny, and how we take information out of destiny and resolve it back into the creative spirit. Now, if you did miss that video, it's available at YouTube/C/Richard Koepsel, and there are many, many videos there, and obviously it would be the one before this. It would be number 86 if you want to be here for the whole series. Now, we're streaming these talks live, warts and all, and it's embarrassing sometimes. But I do hope you continue to come to the talks, because if you stay home, I don't want to be talking to an empty room. Years ago,
Hello? He doesn't see any streaming online.
what?
He does not see streaming online. What do you see, Dale? Nothing live.
Nothing live.
Is it black? There's no opportunity. Hang on, he said it just showed up. What does it say, Dale? What does it say?
It should say Modern Mysticism number
Does it say
87.
Modern Mysticism number 87? It does, so we're okay? There was a lag, sure, okay, yeah, bye-bye. Sorry, I said there was a lag. Oh.
What did he have? Maybe he had to refresh a window, huh? I'll bet that's what happened. I think you have to refresh your window in order for it to come. So what I hope is that people do continue to show up, because I like talking to people. And it's kind of unsettling to be talking to people that you can't see and don't know. I guess that's materialistic of me. But at one time I had a radio show on Wart, and it was a call-in show, and people were supposed to call in and ask questions. And I would get started on a subject and people would be interested and they wouldn't call in. And there I sat in that studio with this big board of switches and everything. And I finally quit the show because it was just being me and the studio. And I didn't like that at all. All right. Before we go into the next question about cause and consequence, there are a few things to clarify from the latter part of the talk that preceded this. I was not happy with the ending part of the last talk, and that led me to some insights, which will take most of the talk tonight. Now, all of us are spiritual aspirants. We're aspiring to live better lives and to live lives of service in everything that we do. And part of that aspiration is improving ourselves. And we improve ourselves by self-analysis, such as using retrospection as a form of self-analysis. Now, when I pondered myself and this talk later in the evening when it was over, something became clear to me. And it was clear that in the talk there were not any really good analogies or images or metaphors or things like that. And I couldn't give images that were good for understanding the concept of the connection of cause and consequence. So I have realized for quite a few years that the ability to form analysis is a good register of how well you are living your spiritual life. If you're well-centered and you're striving to grow spiritually, analogies come easier. And just recently, to my surprise, Max Heindel said the same thing a century ago, only I had forgotten or I didn't take note of it when I read it before. I just ran into it very recently. Now, this knowledge that analogies depend upon spiritual focus clarified the problem, but it didn't give the answer. And the answer, as far as I can understand it, comes from remembering other things in my life. There is a kind of experience which all of us probably have had. We've gone through it maybe many times. I haven't for quite a few years now. It seems to happen most often in arguments or any kind of a situation that you feel disconcerted spiritually. In the argument, you lose the ability to make your point. And then when the argument is over and you're all alone by yourself, you say, I could have said this, or I could have said that. Or you say, I could have avoided taking that route, and everything else would have gone better if I had done that. What is happening is you're actually continuing the argument all by yourself, trying to justify yourself. Arguments are competitive, extremely competitive in the worst way. It's not like playing a game of chess. It's very personal. And the personal involvement in the argument, in that our ego is at stake. Now, the more deeply we are focused into matter, the more we are out of touch with the Spirit. Most people are quite a bit out of touch with the Spirit because they're dead to the spiritual worlds altogether. And the Spirit, obviously, is the source of insight and it's the source of analogy. And from this, I concluded, and I think my conclusion was justly so, that I had too much egoism in myself in the talk. And for that, I apologize. And I'm trying to etch it deeply into myself again at this stage of life, that the talks are all about finding and sharing spiritual truth, and they are not about Richard Koepsel. Now, what led to this way of looking at things was when I was all alone and quiet by myself, analogies and images did come. And two of them were worth note, though one of them is not so good. So we'll start with that one first. It is about introducing new causes into the ongoing stream of cause and consequence. Introducing new causes into destiny. Now, this image that I have to offer is not unique, it's not new, it's something that's very old. And in that image, we can think of sunlight. Sunlight as causing new life, like, say, in a tree. The sun and the sunlight are a mighty source of causation. They affect much more than just the tree. From a spiritual point of view, the sun and the sunlight are the source of everything that exists and that we see around us. And like all creations, it is really love. So sun and sunlight can be seen as love. Though a scientist would balk quite a bit at something like this, but that's the way it is. But the love, that divine, that spiritual love, is impersonal. It's new love, and it causes new life, and it causes growth. So the tree lives and grows, and eventually it reaches its term of life. All things on this plane have a term of life, and then they're over. And then the tree, so to speak, dies, or it is killed, or something like that, and it ceases to exist as a living thing. However, the essence of its experience, that love or that light from the sun, has been trapped. It is right within the tree. It's in the wood, which is why wood is such a nice substance to work with. So if you take the wood and you burn it, the energy is released. And that's sort of like the causal cycle. The new light from the sun is the creative activity, and whether we realize it or not, that creative activity is trying to make things grow, many things in a general way. And then the light is introducing all these causes, and they build up, and when the wood of the tree is burned, they're released. In some cases, the odor of the released vapors is very, very pleasant. It has the characteristic of the tree. Now, materialistic science would have us believe that the energy is lost to chaos. Probably it's called heat pollution or something like that, and it's lost to interplanetary space. It might warm someone along the way, but it is meaningless. But not for mystics. For mystics, the chaos that energy returns to is a very spiritual place. That chaos, it's a chaos of ideas. It is the source and end of everything in our existence, including the sun. Now, that's not a perfect image or analogy, but it roughly addresses the cycle of initiating causes and reinitiating and doing so continuously. It's a cycle that we can experience. A lot of things in spiritual things, you have to be clairvoyant in order to appreciate them, but this is something that anyone can experience. Now, one of the reasons it's not a perfect example is that the whole idea of the activity of the sun is so large and is so removed from human experience that it lacks focus, and it doesn't really address the removal of energy, other than to say that it's lost when something is burned up. So let's look at that in the second image, which is a much more beautiful image, and it's something that we all experience, and it is something that is very, very important. We're going to talk about retrospection. And retrospection is sometimes called the forgiveness of sins. And that is a very excellent name. It is, in that way, it is like a confession. And one is confessing to Christ as the character of the life spirit. The life spirit from which is beyond the law, and which is the source of everything that comes into being. So, all things are injected into the law, into cause and consequence from life spirit. Now, as you recall, life spirit is a sea of selfness, out of which all ourselves are born. We are just foci of that one sea of life spirit. And the character of that life spirit is love, universal love, altruistic love. Has to be altruistic because we all share the same love. Beside being love, it is truth. So when we hear the biblical Christ say, I am the truth, he's speaking literally. He's talking about a truth that is beyond laws, that is beyond principles. Principles and laws are just embodiments of the truth, but the truth itself is in life spirit. So, if we are confessing to Christ, and Christ in the life spirit has character, more character than we can dream of, when we're doing that, we're seeing our actions or our inactions for what they are. We are seeing our deeds in life as true. And we see them in confession into the source of truth. We recognize what we have taken from the potential of truth and made into something positive or something destructive or whatever. So, when one sees it this way, you're like admitting to Christ, yes, I really did that, and it came out well. Or yes, I really did that, and that harmed another person. And when you see the reality of it through reflection to Christ or through projection to Christ, that extracts the essence of that deed. It's like you're seeing your deeds into life spirit. That truth that we see it with is supra-universal. It's like the sun in the first image is universal. Now that fact in itself, since it's beyond even individualities, means that that truth and that love and that newness that comes from life spirit is impersonal. God, as the Bible says, is not a respecter of persons. All right. Now, in order to get at our next basic question about the nature of cause and consequence, we have to look a little bit at cause and consequence in human destiny. And we have to look at it differently than we have been looking at it. We have been very simple about it. So simple that it is almost simplistic. Now, doing this can lead to non-representational views of reality. Simple human destiny has been represented as a chain. One cause is linked to the next cause through a consequence, and the chain extends on into time. Like everything we do is connected. Our deeds are linked like a chain. When our destiny is unresolved, if we don't confess and cleanse and purge ourselves of misdeeds, the chain is with us after we die. And it feels like a heavy onus. It weighs us down. It bears down on us. And for this reason, we have things like Charles Dickens' ghosts groaning under the weight of chains. And that's something that has been known for a long time. Now, that's good. It's a good way of looking at cause and consequence. They're linked together and they're tied, but it's not so good in that it's one-dimensional. Causes and consequences are connected, but they're not only connected in linear form. We interact with other people, And sometimes we're interacting with the world in parallel, and sometimes there are cross connections. And this is also not a new idea. Others have been aware of this long before our time. And for this reason, destiny, cause and consequence, has been seen instead of as a chain, as a net. And a net is a two-dimensional figure. You've heard the expression that one is caught in the net of destiny. Now the net is a suggestive image, and it's been important to a lot of people. Astrologically speaking, destiny is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is the taskmaster and exacts perfection from us. It wants perfect justice, whether it's pleasant or whether it's unpleasant. We have Saturn to thank for that. Now Saturn is exalted in Libra, and Libra is the scales of destiny. The woman Thetis who holds the scale is blindfolded, meaning to say that destiny is impartial. Now anatomically, Libra rules the kidneys. And the kidneys, in a way, are a net which allows, according to the blood pressure, it allows the little things to go through, but the big molecules don't make it through the net, and they slide down, and they end up being eliminated through the urine. Now, that's a very rough, simplified statement, but it's enough to give you an idea that the idea of destiny as a net is utilized by the spiritual hierarchies in developing us physiologically. So it helps us to understand a little bit more of the complications about destiny. Now, another thing that we neglected in our simplistic view is multiple causes producing the same effect, or a single consequence having many factors leading to it. Now, this is the Achilles heel of modern materialistic science. In that science, there is an insistence on reducing things whenever possible, or only to one cause and one consequence. Now, I have a friend who is an inorganic chemist, and he works for NASA. If he hasn't retired by now, he's at that age where he's about to retire. He must be in his 70s. And like many other inorganic chemists, he doesn't want to deal with biological or ecological biochemistry. They say it's not clean. And by that, what they mean is that it's difficult to isolate one factor. There are so many factors in a biosystem that you can't get to one thing. You can't get to a simple cause and consequence relationship. Now, the way of one cause and one consequence, or one cause and one effect when you're dealing with material stuff, has been effective. We have done a lot of things with that. We've proven a lot of things to ourselves about the way of nature, but it really needs to graduate. It needs to grow up, because it is right now so restrictive that it's detrimental to the evolution of human consciousness and investigating reality. It might even be dangerous. Take the analysis of carcinogens. Very, very careful studies have been made about how many parts per billion are safe for a given substance to be in our food or in our water without producing cancer. And the studies are done very, very well. But those studies don't do anything about a mix of several different kinds of carcinogens. That's not clean. There's too many things there. But that's the reality that we live in. We live in a soup of all kinds of carcinogens, and it's important that we understand this. Because anyone knows that you put several things in combination and they have all kinds of effects. Now this is what I'm saying is a gross simplification, but the idea is an important idea. And it isn't just limited to the chemistry of carcinogens. It applies to astrology. A lot of people don't want to look at a situation as having multiple causes. That's not clean. They want just one primary spiritual cause to something. Now, this kind of view is dangerous in another way, because the biochemistry of living things is quite complicated. The environment in which we live here, even if without contaminations, is quite complicated. In the evolution of our dense physical forms, we have evolved our bodies relative to the world around us. We haven't evolved different things in the body in isolation in a lab. We have many things together. But the reality of things is that this is neglected when we do important work, like making medicines, for example. I'll give you an example from years ago. It was found that some Himalayan people are not subject to blood pressure problems even though they live at high altitudes. And so science went to work on this, and they found that eating a certain yam was a regular part of their diet, and it was a factor in the control of blood pressure. So they took it into the lab, and the researchers worked on it, and they found the substance directly connected to blood pressure. And then, in the name of purity and in the name of control, they eliminated all of those seeming unnecessary substances in the yams and took this substance and put it into a pill or a medicine or something like that. And what wasn't realized was that in doing that, they were eliminating the environment in which that substance was produced, and that environment is what the humans have evolved in. When things like that happen, and we have purified substances, which are basically de-evolutionized or denatured, denatured means something a little bit different, it has effects on humans because we haven't evolved relative to those substances bare by themselves. And those effects we call side effects. And the side effects, start a whole new causal chain of person starts out with one medicine and ends up with about 10 medicines. I think the average of it is now you have, by the time you get to be my age in the 70s, you have one medicine for every decade that you've lived. Fortunately, I've been able to stay away from all of them. So, we have these side effects. Now, obviously, the road back to living in harmony with nature in this thing of medicine is a rocky road. It's not smooth at all. In some way, in our attitudes, we have come to think that the medicines are natural. Chemistry is part of nature, and we are enhancing nature by making these kinds of medicines. And some of them are actually even necessary. And they're necessary because we have denaturalized ourselves so much that it requires unnatural things to bring us back to some kind of a balance again. So we need to do a lot of rethinking collectively as humanity. All right, that's the end of the sermon. All right. Now there's one more major factor in cause and consequence that leads to misunderstanding human destiny and looking at human destiny as we want to look at it. And it is something that is not easy to put a name to. We could call it ongoing causation or continuing effectiveness, and that would give you an idea. Now let's go back to the real simple stuff again, but remember that we're in simple to simplistic. We can look at cause and consequence in a really, really simple way and get some idea of what's going on. Let's go back to the example we had last time, pool balls. If you're playing pool and the cue ball hits another ball, that second ball rolls off according to the angle and the spin and all of those sorts of things. And that is in effect caused by the cue ball, we say. But it usually doesn't end there. The cue ball caroms off and it strikes another ball. So it is continuing as a causal agency until it has run out of room to bang into other balls and produce new consequences or to produce new effects. And then there's the fact that the first ball that we hit might hit other balls and they become consequences in their motions. And it gets very, very, this can carry on several levels. Sometimes there are tertiary or quaternary effects, and when you break the whole triangle of pool balls, there are so many effects taking place and so many secondary or whatever causes they are. I don't even know the words in ordinal numbers in order to describe or to have to take a shot at it. In any case, the initial cause persists until all of the balls are at rest. Now, it's sometimes easier to think in terms of causal streams to come closer to what we experience in life. Some of the streams have new causes injected into them so that they almost seem to be perpetual causes. What we call Christianity is like that. It has been going on for about 2,000 years, and there have been all sorts of things injected into it by human beings, by divine beings, and Christ himself, or Christ itself, I don't know how to say it. And it's continuing on as a cause. We call it a Christian cause. Now, taken as a whole, the entire destiny, the entire creation is an all-inclusive causal stream. And new things are being brought into it all of the time. Now, this is rather tedious, and it is tedious when we look at cause and consequence in a skeletal way, because that's all I'm intellectually capable of at this time, though I might take little things here and there and work with them. But in reality, the causal skeleton of things that we participate in and that happen around us has to be fleshed out. And it isn't a matter that things just happen. Because when it gets fleshed out so much and there are so many things going on, sometimes we lose track of cause and consequence. And a lot of people believe there's no justice in the world. I know people who have taught their children that there is no justice in the world, that there is not really any moral cause and consequence. Now, all of this tedium of going into these little details and complexity is brought up for a reason. It is so that in our trying to understand and see into destiny, that we are awed into humility. We humans are in a fallen state, and we are perversely egoistic. We are capable of, and sometimes even likely, to pervert even the most sublime divine wisdom. And we can do that with self-satisfied vanity. Many of us as seekers, when we intuitively understand the truth of cause and consequence, because that intuition feels so true, and we realize that it's coming from a universal source, we think we know much more than we really do. We're often certain why so-and-so is having such and such experience. It's because he did that, or because he's got that attitude, or something like that. Sometimes we're right, but often we are not. And we never often delve more deeply to really understand. And even if we do, a lot of people don't keep score of when their projections, which is what they amount to being, whether they are true or not. When we're correct, we pride ourselves. Look at that, I understood that of that person. And when we're incorrect, it says something about us. What we think of other people, whether it is true about them or not true of them, is talking about ourselves. Very often, what we think is more about us than about the sufferer. Now, if we are true seekers and we want to serve, it behooves us to continue our observations and not just jump to a conclusion that this person was bad in this way or another, but it behooves us to sink ourselves into the truth of it until it does reveal itself to us. Moreover, if we are Christian aspirants, it behooves us to do something to help if we can see that there is unnecessary suffering being generated. And help is not merely a matter of passing judgment or saying you did this, and it's more than just offering unsolicited advice. We have to spiritually get involved and really live our way into helping people. That's the end of the second sermon. It's one of those nice, I guess I must have gotten self-righteous when I made the... All right. We have been observing this magnificent, multiplex stream of destiny. And it really is quite beautiful. Especially because everything originated in that love and truth. No matter how someone perverts it, that love and truth eventually is going to work itself into something beautiful. It may take a few lives, or it may take a long time in this life, but if we stick with it, it becomes something beautiful. At any rate, this brings us to our second impossibly fundamental question about cause and consequence. And this one I don't know that I have a real answer to. The question is, when does a cause become a consequence? When does a cause become a consequence? Now, this is one of these things that we seem to experience all the time, but we take it for granted, and we never question, and because we never question, we never learn. And this brings us into that subject that is always difficult, very difficult. It is time. Time is implied on every level of causality. But that doesn't mean that time is the same on every level of causality. Time is a very paradoxical thing. Recognition of that paradox is found in the second book of Peter, where it says, "But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." That has a lot of meanings, and we could go into all of those. We could do a whole series of talk on that. It appears that the deeper that we go into spiritual worlds, the more time there is until you carry it all the way until there's eternity. I lived with a musical composer once, and he would go into deep concentration, and he liked measures of time where he could put all kinds of things in there, because in that deep concentration there was enough time to do it. I don't know how to say it any other way. There's so much time as we proceed into the spiritual worlds that some investigators report that they are timeless, and that everything as present is present at one time, and it's eternal. Now, here on earth, time is sort of a nervous thing. It's a separation of one instant from the next. And it's not like everything being unified in an eternal coexistence. Now, the paradox is, in what we are doing, we're trying to understand the instant when a cause is transformed into a consequence. But we are doing that in abstract timelessness. When we ask these fundamental questions and we have cleared away everything else, we are in as abstract a state as you can be. In extreme abstraction, the paradox seems to be of benefit as we search out answers to these questions. A more phenomenal approach might be helpful for some things, but let's do that first and then get back to the more eternal sense. All of us have experienced consequences of our actions many times in many things, big and small. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And all of the king's horses and all of the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty together again. Something has changed when a cause has become a consequence. Something has changed forever, and all of the king's horses and all of the king's men can't unchange it. I'm sure we've all said a word that we never wanted to say, and we want to take it back, and you can't take it back. Change is like that. There may be forgiveness that we can redeem the essence out of a circumstance, but something has changed. And we have to do something new if we want to redeem ill effects of a cause like that. Some physicists work with formulas that say or allow the reversibility of time, but those formulas don't take consciousness into account. Conscious experience cannot be reversed. Once you know something, you can't unknow it. You could try if you might. Some people try to forget things. For me, maybe I am reversing time. I'm at that age where I forget a lot of things. Did I zip my pants up tonight? You heard the 4 stages of old age? Oh, the 4 stages of old age is first you forget names, but you remember faces. And then you forget names and faces. And the next stage is you forget to zip up. And the final stage is you forget to zip down. It's gruesome, but that's not in the notes. In simple, we can say that a cause, from this we can say that a cause becomes a consequence when something has changed. But when we do that, that begs the question of what has been changed and how. Now, I might not even have answers for that, not even tentative answers, but I have a few little offerings in that direction. Now, this way of looking at things is a little bit odd, and it may well be daft. This is one of those things that demonstrates our habitual materialistic outlook, which, as spiritual students, we should protest against that. When we ask what has been changed, we automatically, in our materialism, think a substance or a material has been changed. We see that in chemistry. But that doesn't have to be the case in spiritual reality. It could very well be something insubstantial, such as a circumstance, or even consciousness. Now, if we think we can eliminate substance, then cause and consequence can be seen as 2 sides of a relationship of change, which is true whether there's substance or not. That brings us again to the whole idea of, in the most abstract sense, cause and consequence are more like action and reaction. Very abstract. Now, looking at things this way, we can see that a causal relationship is like 2 faces of the same thing. And doing that will help us to come to understand cause and consequence better, and we may be able to answer more questions about it. For example, obviously, cause is action. Without any action, there's no change. There's no consequence. This is obvious, very obvious. This is why the whole principle of cause and consequence is called the principle of action. We could be really simple about it and say that as creative free agents, it behooves us to take action of some kind or another. Now, if we try to understand consequence in this way, it's not so obvious. One could say, again, semantically, one could say that a consequence is an attitude in the causal relationship that registers or reflects or responds to action, in which case a consequence is a reaction. The reaction might just as well be a reflection, because it's the same interface between cause and consequence. Now, this appeals to me in terms of action and reaction, but it's not completely satisfying. There has to be something more. There has to be something that is resistive. I don't know how to say it any other way. It has to be resistive even if it is only an attitude. Because if there wasn't something resistive, causal action would continue on unmodified and there would be no consequence. And that would be sort of like a spiritual perpetual motion machine. Similarly, there would be no reflection without a resistive attitude or nothing to reflect from. This again brings us back to seeing consequence as associated with a substance. Maybe not like our materialistic notion, but there has to be something of a substance that has to be changed in order for a cause to become a consequence. Now we're speaking of things as abstractly as possible. We're talking about bringing the idea as closely as possible to absolute. As cause and consequence approaches absoluteness, there's absolute subtlety. And the character of the consequential substance has to also be so subtle that it is as close to insubstantial as insubstantial can be. Now, if you think about it, this almost exactly describes what mystics in the Western mystery schools describe as cosmic root substance. And the statement is made that cosmic root substance is the opposite pole of the deepest state of spirituality. So we've gotten to the primal idea of taking things out of absolution and recognizing that the creativity is that the creativity of the action meets something in substance that is basically virgin, something that has never been active before. So this is very primal, extremely primal. It's new. And that newness is a fact that Aries in the zodiac would like, because Aries likes new things and Aries likes action. and that Aries is the beginning of the zodiac. And it's like taking something in that regard. Pisces represents the cosmic chaos where there is potential that is actualized. Now this takes us extremely far afield of our original goal, but it's interesting how these things become, when you seek fundamental answers to things, you come to the fundamentals of the creation in a very, very deep way. So, in simple, a cause becomes a consequence when action produces change. It is immediate and it is almost timeless. When we have such a change, we have a word for that, and we call it an event. We are saying that cause becomes consequence when there is an event. An event occurs in the moment, whether it is an eternal moment or an instant, as it is here, or whether it is the duration of the entire cosmic creation. It is an act. And if you look in some of the deepest cosmogonies, going very, very far back in history, the to be or not to be question, to take action or to not take action, is a part of the initial creation in all cosmologies. So anytime we set a causal action into flow, that we are participating, whether we realize it or not, we're participating at the very root of creation. That should have us in awe of our lives and what we can do, and even what we cannot do. Now there's much more in this, and some of it is very practical and useful, but this is way too big, and this is all the further we're going to go with this evening. I don't know if I even want to continue on this because it'll take us way down the garden path, and we'll look a little bit into it before we get to our next question. And I think we maybe have only one more question, though there are several more I would like to answer or try taking the answer of. And then I'd like to do a practicum, though we can see how all of these things relate in our life and what we can do to help the world by them. Are there any questions? No? Well, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Now you can hit that same stop streaming button on the little computer. To the right, way to the right. Yeah, it'll take a few seconds and then YouTube will say, you're done. See, it froze on the YouTube screen.